Welcome to a very special celebration episode of Titanic Legacy, a podcast that explores Titanic's lasting impact through conversations with creators, authors, artists, historians, filmmakers, musicians, entrepreneurs, family members, and more who continue to keep the Ship of Dreams legacy not just alive, but thriving through their creative work and conversations. I'm your host, Paul Carganilla, and as I mentioned, today is a very special occasion. 40 years ago today, Robert Ballard and his team discovered the elusive wreckage of our beloved Ship of Dreams. To celebrate that day and this milestone, I'm celebrated to bring you a conversation with some very dear friends, all of whom I've been blessed to speak with on multiple occasions here in the podcast space. Each of these humans is an amazing person, and if you haven't yet, I invite you to go back and listen one at a time. They've been featured on an episode here, and it's like the Avengers. They've all had their own movie, and now we're getting together to have these great conversations. So please, if you love the people, and I'm sure you will, that you meet here today, go back and listen to our featured conversations. Now, we have a lot to dig into, so I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. Very briefly here, please welcome veteran entertainment reporter, author of Kindred Spirits, A Titanic Tale, and co-host of the podcast Titanic Talk. Let's hear it for Nelson Aspen.
Thank you. It's great to be alphabetically prominent.
Always.
Much better to have a name that starts with A than Z. Although in my past life it started with an L for Milton Long, but I digress. Thank you for having us here today, Paul. And I'm looking forward to talking to about Dr. Ballard because, I was thinking that the sort of second life that Titanic has enjoyed is because of finding the wreck. And we often talk about, James Cameron's movie rebooted Titanic for new generations. But Cameron himself would not have been as enticed by the Titanic story had it not been for his desire to visit the wreck. So all roads lead back to Dr. Ballard today.
Love it. And that's what we are celebrating. Thank you for being here. And also let's welcome great-granddaughter of Titanic survivor Leah Axe, Shelley Binder. Hi, Shelley.
Hey, Paul. How are you?
So great. So glad you're here today. Can't wait to talk about your memories of the 1980s. And we'll get to that.
Well, first I have to ask, how is Everly?
Everly's good. She's back in school, so I just dropped her off, and it's her second week of middle school. She's enjoying it.
What a great kid. I had the pleasure of meeting her and actually being interviewed by her. And I mean, I've never met any older soul in a small body. Really cool kid.
She is, and thank you for asking. And she's doing wonderfully. And we'll get into all the updates, but let's keep rolling along. Next up, let's welcome an actress from James Cameron's '97 film. She's the filmmaker, director, producer of the wonderful documentary Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, and co-host with Nelson Aspen on the Titanic Talk podcast. Let's hear it for Alexandra Boyd. Hello, my dear.
Thank you.
So good to see you. It's been since the event in April on the Queen Mary.
But it's so good to see but as Nelson just pointed out, all roads keep bringing us back. The Venn diagram, the roads keep bringing us back together. So here we are, whether we like it or not. And that wreck is still at the bottom of the ocean. And while it's still there, we'll keep talking about it. And even once it's gone to dust.
Well, you think about it, and she slipped under the surface 113 years ago, and we're still all getting together and having these awesome conversations and creating new connections every day.
It's amazing. Yes, I love it.
All right. Now, the man, the myth, the legend that I always say needs no introduction right before I introduce him. He's the famed Titanic historian and author of Titanic, an illustrated history that's on any Titaniac's shelf. And of course, Ghosts of the Abyss, among so many other publications. He's the official historian of the Titanic Historical Society. Ladies and gentlemen, Don Lynch.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank you for calling us humans. That's for me, that's flattering.
You're just always held up on a pedestal. It feels good to be called a human from time to time.
Yeah, yeah. Either on a pedestal or holding one up somewhere, underneath it, whatever. But
I
thank you. It's
love it.
good to be here.
Thank you for being here. And unless we're joined by additional throughout the episode, last but not least, the great grandson of Quartermaster Robert Hitchens, who was at the helm of Titanic at the moment she struck the iceberg, author of Titanic Day by Day, 366 Days with the Titanic, dear friend of the show, Simon Medhurst.
Yeah, thank you. I think I feel a bit of a swizz being here because my story didn't really start till 2000, so I don't really have the knowledge that you guys have got. So for me, it's really just I'm just listening and enjoying this one.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it's just great to have you here, especially this is the first time I've been on the same stage as Don, so this is quite a privilege to me. Again, a human being. But I'm very thankful for being invited, and thank you very much.
Oh my goodness. I'm so grateful for you all this was a last minute ask. Who wants to get together and just talk about this milestone? If anyone's heard my Titanic origin story, I was first introduced. I was sitting on my grandparents' Davenport. You don't call it a couch in their house. And they had National Geographics on the counter. And I picked this one up from 1985, the December issue. And I started flipping through and seeing these images of this ship that had been at the bottom of the ocean, this floating fortress. And I said, what is this? And that was my first experience getting to meet the idea, this dream that was Titanic. And now, gosh, 40 plus years or 40 years later, I guess I would have been five at the time. And here it is, such a big part of my life and bringing me, bringing connections to so many amazing humans like these here today on the chat. I didn't have a formal plan for this chat. I just thought it'd be fun to get together and talk about if any memories we have, this panel has of the discovery or Dr. Ballard. And I actually did flip through Ballard's memoir to the moment when he first laid eyes on the wreckage. And if I may just read a little bit, he had just gone up to his stateroom and was getting ready for bed, exhausted. And someone knocked on my door. A voice called out. It was the cook. Why? I thought, is the cook here at 1 a.m? The guys think you should come down to the van, he said. He didn't have to finish the sentence. The watch team must have seen something big enough that none of them wanted to leave their screens. I could just hear the conversation. Somebody had better get Bob, but I'm not the one who's going. So they told me through the grapevine. I hopped back into my blue jumpsuit and bam, I was out there gliding down 2 decks with my hands on the railings, turning a corner, my feet barely touching the steps. I blasted into the command center, looking toward the screens on the front wall. I saw debris on the 3 screens displaying Argo's black and white video feeds, and I was looking at the plot to see where we were. There was a compass heading, a bearing. I could see how high off the ocean floor we were. I was sucking it all in, forming a mental image. Then I heard Stu Harris's voice telling me what they'd just seen. It was a ship's boiler. The crew members were buzzing with joy, and one of them rewound the tape so I could see it for myself. The tape showed that Stu had been the first to spot some smaller debris. You could hear him say simply, "There's something." Moments later, Bill Lang, whose job was to document what we saw, shouted, "Wreckage!" That was followed minutes later by Stu's "Bingo!" Then Bill's "It's a boiler!" The video images confirmed their enthusiasm. There it was, a metal cylinder more than 15 feet in diameter with rivets and 3 large doors for shoveling in coal, just like the boilers and pictures we had of Titanic. God damn, I said. God damn. And that was the first time Ballard laid eyes on it. And if you haven't picked up any of the books I've talked about today, I encourage you. They're all on Amazon. But it's amazing to think it's been 40 years. But I mean, for me, she's been discovered my whole life. But do any of you have memories of her still not being found or leading up to the discovery?
I was 22 when in 1985, and already a Titanic enthusiast. So as Don and probably Simon would remember, certainly, this was just, the great mystery. Where did she go? And in my case, it was so exciting to me. And I spoiler alert, I believe that in my past life, I was first-class passenger Milton Long, a rather obscure but important footnote in Titanic history. So I have all these coincidences of being accidentally addressed as Milton over the years. And I was so excited. That National Geographic that you held up, that was only the beginning. I mean, Ballard was on the cover of everything. He was the front page news everywhere, every television show, every media outlet. And yet I, naive and determined as I was at 22, knew I had to find him. I got out the old-fashioned phone book, which, today's people don't know what a phone book was. But, the phone book, tenacity, and through the U.S. Navy, I tracked him down to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. I never dreaming he would take my call, but I had to try. And the receptionist put me through. And a moment later, Dr. Ballard, the most famous man in the world that week, took my call and said, "Hello, Milton?" And all of my suspicions were confirmed. And the amusing part to that story was I begged, like, what can I do? I'll swab the decks. I'll do anything to be a part of your expedition. Because at this point, they hadn't gone down to explore. They had just located it. And I mean, this speaks to his character, which comes through actually quite well in what you just read, Paul. He just sounds like the nicest guy. I'm sure Don has met him and can tell us stories about the man. But he sent me 2 days later in my mailbox came an application to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. He took all my contact information and he had the time to, sort of pat me on the head and say, good boy, here's an application. I of course, decided a career in show business was going to be much more of a payoff. So I did not go to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. But I never forgot that small act of kindness, which was not so small to me. And I'll finish by saying, if it weren't for that debris field, that Jack Thayer, we got to give Jack Thayer props for him, because Jack Thayer was the one who said the boat split in two, and a lot of people did not agree with that. And if the boat hadn't split in two, there wouldn't have been that debris field. And it was, at least according to the reports that I've read, Ballard's belief in that debris field that led him to the discovery. So we got to give Jack Thayer a shout out for that.
Isn't it amazing to think that for so many years, it was a debate whether or not it split in half? That's kind of mind-blowing today. Mm-hmm. Don, do you remember Bob as such a kind and respectful man as Nelson painted him to be?
Yeah, I've seen Bob at Titanic Historical Society conventions, met with him in person. We both were hosted, I guess, by National Geographic at the Television Critics Association convention in 2012. And, my early impressions of him were how impressive he was, because he isn't just an oceanographer. Suddenly, he's a celebrity, and you realize that he has to be also a PR guy. He can't just do oceanography, and he has to be a fundraiser. You realize in order to do the things he does, he's got to find funding. And you realize when you meet him and talk to him how many different hats he has to wear and has to be good at. Mm-hmm. And that's really impressive. And I've also seen him when he's, kind of a fun guy. I was just thinking of the Television Critics Association convention in Pasadena, because there were just so many people there, and it was for the 100th anniversary of the Titanic and thing. And here Bob was a celebrity. And I remember he and Ken Marshall and I kind of went and hid in the men's room so we could kind of talk without, being found. And just because he just didn't want to be bothered, by all these strangers and everything, because he didn't get a chance to see us that often. So, he can be a really fun guy, but very serious also, and certainly accomplished, and yeah, an amazing person that he can do so many different things.
Alexandra, you know a bit about having to fundraise something you're working on. Do you have memories of the discovery?
I no, I don't. I have to say I don't, because my a world of Titanic was cracked open with my audition for the film via Nelson, who had the shelf full of, he had the library of books and VHS that I was able to go to. I did go to the real library in Los Angeles as well. I don't even know if it's still there. And there was, just pick a subject, pick a person who was on Titanic, pick, the number of rivets, the information is there for you. So it had already been discovered. It was already a phenomenon by the time I was introduced to it. And sort of, through the medium of my job and of film and how films are made, it was, that in itself, being part of a film like Titanic, which was put together in such a way with the hubris of the people who made and promoted Titanic herself. The parallels were not lost on us. And of course, what was very clever in James Cameron's film was that it opens with the wreck. It opens with that shot of the bow. I just got a little chill now. That iconic shot that we're all so, with the rusticles and everything. And of course, it's led to many, many people wanting to see it in real life, IRL. They want to go down there and have that image and that shot for themselves. And sometimes that can be a dangerous endeavor. But Jim got to do it. And I've heard, I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I heard he was pitching this story about Romeo and Juliet on Titanic so he could get the budget to go down himself and use the roving cameras to go inside as much as good and shoot so he could see the shot in real life himself. So the parallels and the crossover,
Well,
I'm rather late to the party, but I still get to experience that amazing feeling.
the business aspect is interesting. And Don, you probably know the answer to this, but wasn't his expedition a joint cooperation with another mission? I think it was French. And he was under like a time crunch. Like if he didn't find the Titanic, he was allowed to look for Titanic, but he had a time window before the money ran out.
Yep.
Well, yes, he did. He was sent there the Titanic part was a joint expedition with the French, but he was on a Navy expedition to find the lost, and I say lost, they hadn't really been, I think they knew where they were pretty much, but the nuclear subs that America had lost,
Right.
the Thresher, and I can't remember off the top of my head.
Scorpion.
The Scorpion, thank you very much. Thanks. And so it was to find those. And when he found that they had sort of broken up and he found them by finding debris, he realized that that's how you would look for the Titanic, as I recall him saying this. And so, but then he only had time if there was time afterwards. He could go look for the Titanic. And he did have time at the end of the expedition. The expedition was this long. Here's the focus. If you have any leftover time, go look for the Titanic. And he did. And they were able to find it. Fortunately, like if you're thrilled about them finding it, yes, fortunately, it was funny at the time because I remember thinking, oh, now that it's going to be found, it's just a matter of time before they start going down there and grabbing stuff. And then sure enough, that's what happened.
Yeah, and it's amazing if you dig into his memoir, Into the Deep, how when he would bring up, we should find Titanic, and his colleagues would scoff and mock him like it was not this was not a scientific expedition. This was just for press, and you amateur, how dare you even bring that up? But super interesting. Alexandra mentioned the pitch meeting where the Romeo and Juliet came in, and I gotta just give a shout out to Don Lynch because legend has it, he threw Don's book on the table in front of these producers and opened it up and said Titanic, Romeo and Juliet on this ship. And Alexandra mentioned the beginning of the film and how Cameron beautifully crafted and wrote into the screenplay an explanation of the collision and the breakup and how it settled at the bottom of the ocean for people who weren't familiar with Titanic. Like, now we know what happened, and he worked it in beautifully. Just to shout out, we say, Titanic and pop culture got a huge shot in the arm from Ballard's discovery, and I would say a second shot in the arm from Cameron's movie, which, Cameron was obviously very, very inspired by the work of Dr. Robert Ballard. So,
who is one of the most enthusiastic, vocal supporters of preserving Titanic. That, like, don't go down there. We have the AI. Like, respect the wreck. No one seems to wave the flag of respect for the wreck more than the man who found it.
Yes. And Shelley, as someone who is directly related to a survivor on the ship, were you monitoring Ballard's expeditions as they were happening in the 80s?
Somewhat. I would say there was a myriad of thoughts about it in my family. My Leah Axe was my mother's grandmother. So my grandmother and my Uncle Phil were both very much alive. But my grandmother, she was born 11 months after the accident. And, my grandmother, by her own admission, was in and out of the hospital due to a nervous collapse. So do I think she was ready to get out? Maybe not, but my great grandfather couldn't care for Phil, my great uncle, and a newborn. So she got out and got herself together and started raising my grandmother. But my grandmother never had a good feeling about that ship. She, now my Uncle Phil was very, very involved. Don probably can tell you more, with the Titanic Historical Society. He was very much involved with a museum in my hometown, the Mariners Museum. And, he went to other conventions, and he was in the news constantly. I hundreds of newspaper articles. And I do have, I probably can later, if anybody's interested, go and find it. But there is a little video about his reaction to Ballard finding the ship on September 1st, 1985. And they asked him if he thought, how he felt about it, and did he think that people should go down? And he said, no, I think they should leave it alone. Then my mother, every time something happens with a ship, people kind of come looking for us. So, first it was my great grandmother, and she got to do really fun things like go to Hollywood and go to New York. She was at the premiere of Titanic 1953, and I have the original photo with her and Thelma Ritter and my great uncle Phil. And she was on Robert Ripley's Believe It or Not, the radio show. She got to do a lot of cool things. Now, her daughter, my grandmother, did not have a good feeling about that ship. And I have to wonder if it was because she saw in a real way how negatively that ship had affected her mother. In fact, it affected my great-grandmother so much that when my grandmother got her birth certificate, she wanted to go overseas, and she was her and my grandfather were older, and she had never seen her birth certificate, but she had to get a passport you have to write to the state capitol and they send you a copy of your birth certificate. Well, my great grandmother, her entire life until that point, knew that her name was Sarah Carpathia Axe. When she got, I actually physically have her, all of her documents. I inherited my great grandmother's documents and photos and my grandmother's. And her birth certificate says Sarah Titanic Axe. It's kind of funny, but when you think about it, it's kind of not, because I think my great grandmother, when she gave birth to my grandmother, was kind of raving. And the nuns in the hospital misinterpreted what she wanted to name her child, because she must have been excitedly recounting her experience. So my great grandmother, who I knew until I was 8, she was excited about it. She was dead, actually. My Uncle Phil was excited about it, but didn't want anybody to go there. My grandmother couldn't have cared any less. She was not into that at all. My mother was very much into it, and she did an interview where I remember her saying, if they find my grandmother's trunk, meaning her traveling trunk, I want to get back everything in there, which of course wouldn't happen. But all of us were excited, minus my grandmother. And my Uncle Phil, who I actually have on film, saying, leave it alone. It's a graveyard, leave it alone. He didn't see any use to it.
And it's interesting when you hear people, I don't know all the laws around it, and I could be definitely more educated and read up on it, but I've heard that if Ballard brought up a spoon, he would then have rights to the wreckage. Does that sound right?
He would have had salvage rights, but only for a period of time, because they do expire. And that's why things have been brought up repeatedly from the wreck. But also, salvage laws vary from country to country, and it's in international waters. So, it is a gray area.
Legal battles continue today. Simon, I know you mentioned, obviously, anyone who knows your story knows you came into the Titanic lineage kind of later in your life.
Yeah.
And so when this was happening in the 80s, did you have was it on your radar at all?
No, I think, I got married in 1988, so I had quite a lot on my mind before that. But I think because I started collecting things once I got married, and I was in my early 20s then, so I started collecting Titanic memorabilia, anything I could get my hands on. I think it probably started from my father-in-law, who I think got a book from the library, and I think I just looked at it when I was there, and I was now after that I was totally hooked. So that had all about Robert Ballard, all about the finding of Titanic, and I think he even collected. He was very much a collector of sort of cuttings of newspapers. So I think in those days, they would cut a bit of newspaper out and then stick it in like a scrapbook. So I think he had all these things, and that hooked me in my early 20s. So for me, just sucking all that information in, but obviously it wasn't till I'm 47 before I find out that I'm actually related at all. So so when it came to that, then it's obviously the whole thing's changed. But hearing from people who have been in it from the word go is quite fascinating, from someone who's just sort of jumped on the end, if you like, and trying to get in as much information as possible. Obviously 2012 was when I found out, so that was exactly 100 years. So that in itself was quite a thing for me. So for me to be here to listen to you guys is amazing, because it gives me that bit of background that I haven't got.
If you out there haven't heard Simon's fascinating story, uh, tune in to either his episode, I think it was 3 or 4 of this podcast, or find his episode on Titanic Talk podcast and hear his story. It's phenomenal. Nelson, I know you're kind of up against the clock, so if you need to leave, if you have any parting thoughts.
I do, and I will just say, for those of you that have yet to see it, and I just saw it for the first time this year, and I'm going back again next year, the Museum Titanic Belfast not only is spectacular for all things Titanic, but the Robert Ballard portion of the museum is unbelievably beautifully well done and fascinating. Some people might just only be interested in in the ship then kind of thing, whatever. But it really is spectacular. And I'm going back next year, and I encourage everyone to check it out because world class, to say the least.
Before you go, let's mention that trip and how can anybody get information on that trip?
Well, thank you. I will see Gina. See, I'm not really the plug machine you think I am. Yes, I'm leading a tour, a Shades of Ireland tour next October of 26. So I'll be taking people from Dublin to Belfast. Culminating the last leg of the trip is 2 or 3 days in Belfast, including the Titanic experience at the museum. So I'm easy to find, Nelson Aspen, and there's a whole page designated to travel on my website. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. So I can turn anything into Titanic. You want to do a Broadway show, you want to do a brunch, we can whatever you want. I can turn it into a Titanic celebration. But Belfast is, as those of you who have been there to see that museum, highly recommended, and such a tribute to the man. Happy anniversary, and thank you, Dr. Ballard.
If we come a week early or stay a week late, can we hang out with Michael down in Cove?
Yeah, of course we can. He's such a, Dr. Michael Martin is such a friend of our community as well. Supported my book signing in London. Like, he came from Cove to London to hang out and support the book. So, I mean, talk about the community of good folks. We have found our people, Paul.
That's right. That's right. Well, go find your other people.
Thank you for organizing this, Paul. I'll look forward to watching the last 15 minutes.
Thank you for jumping on. Nelson Aspen.
Thanks, guys.
Don, we've learned so much from your wisdom already, but we haven't heard, were you glued to the TV when all this was happening, or what was your story?
Yeah, I was. I don't remember the exact moment I heard that it had been found, but of course there'd been expeditions for years. And at one point, I think it was Jack Grimm found something curved down there and thought he'd found a propeller. And so that made the news that they might have found the wreck. And so obviously it was a big deal. The phone was ringing a lot. But I remember, Ken Marshall and I were very close to Ruth Blanchard at that time, because she was alive and one of the survivors. And one of the most I guess you could say eloquent of them, gave great interviews, was comfortable and everything. And so we just called, to see how she was doing. And it was funny because she just happened to pick up the phone because it had been ringing off the hook. And she just happened to have it down before it had rung when it rang, and it was us calling. And she had been overwhelmed. She said pretty much it was like 1912 again, as far as reporters wanting to hear all about it. And so she finally it was kind of an interesting story, is she got an unlisted number. And because people would call, like reporters would call from Australia, and they would make no allowance for the time change. And so they'd call her in the middle of the night, things like that, just to try to reach a survivor who, gave a good interview, was eloquent, all that. And so she finally called the phone company to get, a new number. And of course, the person asked why did she need an unlisted number? And she said, well, I was on the Titanic and all these reporters are calling me. I'm being harassed. And so as a result, she got it for free. She didn't have to pay for it. And so that was, kind of interesting, because it was just for her the start of it was 1912 again, like she said, when suddenly reporters were everywhere and wanted to hear all about it. But her opinion was, bring up one item. If you're going to bring up something, just bring up one item. That's all you have to do. Just bring up one thing that people can see came from the Titanic. They don't need to see everything from the Titanic. And in her mind, then leave it alone after that. And she was one of the people who had seen it break in two and, knew that she knew she was right because she said the people all around her in the lifeboat talked about it. And she was in lifeboat 13, where Lawrence Beasley was. And when he wrote about it, he wrote about the ship going down in one piece. And yet she said all the people around her in the boat were all talking about the ship breaking in two.
Mm-hmm.
So why he saw it differently from the people around him, I don't know. But I knew another survivor who had died in 1984. And this is why people don't understand why, like people would argue with survivors back then and say, oh no, it went down in one piece or whatever. She was in collapsible D and she was 27 at the time, Edwina Trout, and she was very close. She only left the ship 20 minutes before it went under. And she remembered it going down intact at a low angle. And she didn't remember it breaking in two. And so, now, granted, she probably didn't have her glasses with her. But, that was what we were going through before they found the ship. You had people who still saw it both ways. And so, people say, well, why did they argue with them? They were there. And it's like, well, yeah, because there were other people who were there who said differently. So, but that finding it in two pieces, that just settled it if once and for all. We should have known by all the debris, chairs, things like that, dining room chairs floating on the surface. The information was always there staring us in the face. But, until they found the ship, it just wasn't confirmed in anybody's mind.
Wasn't it something like during the investigations, like 8 people said it didn't break in half, but 30 something said it did, but for some reason the 8 people's stories won out?
If you read the Senate inquiry, which was immediately afterwards, as soon as the Carpathia docked in New York, they started interrogating people, and most of them said they saw it break in two, and some of them talked very specifically about it, that they could see things falling out of the forward half, or the aft half, into the water as it broke apart, looked like it had been cut by a knife, that sort of thing. And some people say, well, at the point it broke, it should have been so far underwater you wouldn't have seen anything fall out. That people talk, we study it, but we tend to ignore the testimony. But then at the British inquiry, they'd pretty much made up their mind in advance. And I think they basically told the witnesses it didn't break in two. I'd have to go back and reread it, but it was more specific at the British inquiry that it didn't break in two. We've established that sort of thing. And whereas the Senate inquiry, you're right, the number of witnesses overrode, the ones who thought it went down intact or claimed it went down intact, I guess we could say.
Again, it's just so wild to think back and, realize there's a time not too long ago we weren't sure, but wow, 40 years have gone by and we celebrate that discovery from Dr. Ballard. Any final thoughts from any of y'all fine folks?
I was going to, I was listening really in an interesting way to Shelley's story about her family and stuff that I'm sort of looking into about inherited trauma, how your great grandmother she was in full PTSD mode, which, nobody talked about at the time. It was even pre-First World War, which is when they started to talk about shell shock and the effects of a traumatic event. You survived the event, girls, pull your socks up and get on with your life. You're the lucky one, right? But survivor guilt and all that stuff, and how it's transferred to children in this very subtle and, way that can be very, it's a sort of silent mental killer. And so her child was like, I can't have anything to do with with this ship, because I know subconsciously it was so close to my mum's state of mind for the rest of her life. And then going back to people's accounts of, well, I saw it break into, well, I saw it not. Police reports all the time, witness reports all the time on car crashes and traumatic events. People are they're not in their own minds. They're outside of their own bodies. They're in a state of shock, or they're about to go into a state of shock that never leaves them. So for me, as a writer and a storyteller, I'm really fascinated in the human stories. Of course, it's incredible that we know that ship is down there. We know, every day new stories are being discovered about the people on it, because, 1,500 people, 2,000, more than 2,000 people. Everyone has a story, every single one. and that's the human part, bringing it back full circle, Paul, about humans, is that, you know, as humans, we are fascinated with this story. We're fascinated with the ripple effect, pun intended, the ripple effect of how I think we are fascinated because we're fascinated with people's human stories. And that's what it boils down to. It's a big hunk of metal, but it had human people in it whose lives went on, like Shelley's family and Simon's, you know, Simon's great grandfather or great grandfather.
Yes. Yeah.
His story. And Lookout Fleet, the guy who, you know, those crew members, some of them never recovered as survivors. And that's what sustains for me. That's what I take away when I hear, you know, Titanic again and the story.
That's very interesting. I have a YouTube channel. I sadly haven't had a lot of time lately to do much on it, but one of the ones that I did was on epigenetic trauma. And if Paul, well, I think our emails are attached to that one that he sent, but I'm happy to send you that. I'll link to that. I don't see how I cannot be affected by that ship directly. I mean, my great grandmother was, as you said, shattered, absolutely shattered, and for a long time, actually. And then she raised my grandmother, and I think she was really seriously undermined, and, you know, mentally, emotionally. And then my grandmother raised my mother, and my mother raised me. And so I really don't see how I cannot be directly affected by my great grandmother's trauma, and also my great grandfather's trauma, because he thought she was dead for 4 days with his firstborn son. And he suffered terribly.
Wow.
Her family in London, they held a kind of funeral memorial service for her and for Philly. They thought they were dead. And it wasn't, and I have the newspaper article from 1912, and it was April 18th, the day that Carpathia arrived in New York, where Henry Brandt, who was the White Star representative locally in my hometown, found out. He got a telegram from White Star. He went and delivered that message to my great grandfather, who was understandably so shocked that he fainted, fell off his porch, and got a concussion. But he was affected. And so there's another aspect to this. Actually, I'm so glad you brought up epigenetic trauma. And that is, there's a physical component to it, where the sperm and the egg are actually changed at a DNA level if you're traumatized. And my great grandmother got pregnant with my grandmother after 3 months, and my great grandfather. So I'm sure she was also affected by that. So there's two parts of that. There's the DNA portion of it, and then the behavioral portion of it. And I would love to talk to you more about it, because I've definitely, the little video I made talks about this in detail and how I feel about it. So it's a subject that really means a lot to me.
Yeah. And it's a very new subject, I think. Now, to me, when I think about my family's personal history, my grandmother lived through 2 world wars. My mother lived through 1, the Blitz, and all of that stuff. And I grew up with those stories. I wasn't personally affected, but like I said, it passes on down, and we're only now beginning to realize, generational trauma and how it can be passed on in these subtle little ways. But I didn't know that the DNA gets involved as well. So that's another whole conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Super interesting. And as we're a little bit up against the clock here, I want to ask, does this sound like an interesting topic for a future episode of either Titanic Talk or Titanic Legacy? I think so. I'd love to discuss that topic in general. Shelley, can I link the YouTube video to in the description of this episode?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Did you find it on my channel?
I haven't yet, but I will.
Okay.
I will find it, and I'll throw it in the details here.
I can send it to you.
And Don, any last thoughts on Ballard and his discovery?
No, I just, looking back, I think if somebody had to find it, somebody who's involved, I'm glad it was him. I think it worked out very well in the long run, even though, again, we've seen things brought up, and that's a whole different discussion. But, I'm glad it was found in the long run. If you'd asked me when I was in high school if they'd ever find it in my lifetime, I would have said never. I honestly believed it was beyond finding at the bottom of the ocean, given the technology that was available back then. But, in the end, eventually it was going to be found. And so I'm glad Bob did it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad Bob did it too, and I'm so happy to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the discovery with these amazing human beings and dear friends. I'm going to put links to all of their books, movies, YouTube videos that we've discussed in the description of this video. Again, if you want to hear more from any of these guests, scroll back through my episodes and Titanic Talk episodes and get to know these fantastic people. I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to our guests who joined so last minute. And of course, thank you to Dr. Robert Ballard for discovering the wreck 40 years ago today. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, leave a positive review, all the things that help your independent podcasts thrive. And until the next episode, seize the day, follow your heart's fire, and make each day count. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you, guests.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.